What's going on, guys? Tyler here from Audioholics Anonymous, and today I bring to you the wrong opinion on Gojira. Now, Gojira is a pretty important band to me. I'm a big fan of Gojira because they essentially got me into a lot of heavier music, a lot of heavier genres like black metal, death metal, metalcore, stuff with harsh vocals. And I'd never really listened to that stuff aside from like maybe Slipknot in the past. And that's basically just because like I wasn't accustomed to the vocals and the songwriting was like hard for me to get into. But Gojira changed that. They're a great gateway band into those genres, I think, because their songwriting is complicated sometimes, and sometimes the music can be hard to listen to. But I would say for the most part, their music is memorable and it's easy to headbang to, and it's just fun. It's just fun music, and it stands for a good purpose as well. Most of their songs talk about real issues and real problems and things that matter, like climate change and human rights violations in other countries and how we need to focus on the environment and just good messages, right? And so I am a fan of Gojira, and I have been since roughly 2017, I think, is when I really started to get into them, because that was after Magma came out. I really liked Silvera, Shooting Stars, Stranded, and I was sort of getting into the band through that album. So, really important band for me, because after that I started getting into like Death and Morbid Angel and, Bathory and Venom and just heavier shit, Opeth eventually. So I owe these guys a huge debt of gratitude, and without further ado, I'll get right into my ranking of their studio discography, starting off with 2003's The Link, which I'm ashamed to say I just don't like very much. I wish I saw more in this record, but to me, it's just kind of generic tech death, and it's not interesting. The songs don't really click with me. I think the production is worse. I think pretty much everything about it is worse when compared to the debut album. I don't know if that's like a controversial opinion, that this album isn't as good as Terra Incognita, but I would go even farther and say that Terra Incognita is closer to the sound that we know Gojira for than The Link is. Again, I don't know if that's a controversial opinion, but I truly feel that way after listening to both of these albums like at least 3-4 times each. That's just how I feel about it. I wrote in my notes that I really liked the title track, The Link, and Embrace the World. Those were my favorite songs, but I felt this album was kind of bloated. It went on too long. There were too many instrumentals, too, that just didn't really go anywhere. I didn't like it, guys. I didn't like it. But that's not to say it's a bad album. And clearly there is something there that I'm just not seeing, because a lot of people love this record. It's one of their favorite Gojira records even, which is insane to me. But it's not for me, but it's not a bad album by any means. So I'll give it a 3.2 out of 5. So at number 6, we have 2001's Terra Incognita, which is the debut album of Gojira, and this is just basically better in every way when compared to The Link. It's more interesting songwriting-wise. I feel like what they were doing here wasn't as unique or interesting as the later stuff, but if you just want like a pretty good tech death album, you're going to get that with Terra Incognita. The vocals are very heavy and hard-hitting, the riffs complicated and technical, and again, hard-hitting. The drumming is on point, the bass guitar is awesome. This album's really good. I think my biggest issue with it is just that the songwriting, and I know this is like a vague criticism, so sorry for that, but I just feel like the songwriting isn't quite at the level it should be for a truly great record. It really does kind of feel, again, in sort of a vague way, like your first attempt at a record. It feels amateurish. It just feels not polished. And that is a double-edged sword, because it does kind of feel maybe more raw than some of their later stuff, but it definitely has some flaws to it. My favorite songs were Clone, Lizard Skin, Space Time. Space Time especially has always been one of my favorite Gojira songs, and that's one of my favorite riffs of all the time. I fucking love that shit. That riff is amazing, and the drumming is so on point. I fucking love it. It's so good. But as a whole, I don't think the album's quite that great. So I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. So moving on, at number 5, we have 2016's Magma. Now, again, this record is the one that kind of got me into the band, it's the one that introduced me to the band, but it's not the one that kept me interested, it's not the one that made me a fan. And there is a reason for that. Sort of in the same way that Terra Incognita kind of sounds like it's their first attempt at this sound, Magma also sounds that way, because this is a step in a different direction from Le Font Sauvage, which was their last studio effort, which was much heavier, and Magma took a step more towards the mainstream and the less proggy, and the songwriting wasn't quite as interesting. I don't feel like they really knew what they wanted to do quite yet. I feel they got there with the next release, and we'll get there a little bit higher on the list. But this one is still a really good record. Again, Shooting Star, Silvera, Stranded, some of just the best Gojira songs. It's a great album. It's a great album, but it does suffer a little bit from filler, and again, the whole sort of like, this is their first attempt at the sound, so the songwriting isn't quite there. Brings it down a bit. I can't quite give it a 4 out of 5, but it's damn close. So I give it like a really, in the Metal Meltdown's words, a really enthusiastic 3.75 out of 5. Like a really enthusiastic 3.75 out of 5. So at number 4, I have 2008's The Way of All Flesh. And if you guys know this channel, you should be kind of surprised at this, because this used to be by bar none my favorite Gojira record. I used to love this thing to bits. I still do, but I'll tell you why it's lower. Okay. We covered this album in Audioholics Unite. I had so much fun. That was one of my favorite episodes. These are some of my favorite songs on any Gojira record ever. The Art of Dying is a masterpiece, guys. It is a masterpiece. The Way of All Flesh, masterpiece. Toxic Garbage Island, masterpiece. Ouroboros, masterpiece. Adoration for None, fucking masterpiece. Okay? This album is amazing. Except when it's not. Unfortunately, I have now kind of fallen out of favor with quite a few songs on this record. I do not like Yama's Messengers. I get annoyed every time that song comes on. It just feels like filler. It's not as well written. All the Tears, I kind of like the subject matter, but the execution I'm not huge on. Honestly, the lyrics are awesome, but the execution of the actual music lets me down a bit. Esoteric Surgery is such a nothing song, and so is Wolf Down the Earth. I've probably heard this album a million times, and I have never remembered that song's existence. Outside of those songs, it's a great record with all of those other amazing songs I mentioned, but there's so much filler on this album compared to the other releases ahead of it. I can't put it ahead of those albums, and don't get me right. Don't get me wrong. Okay, don't get me right. Don't get me wrong. Gojira filler is still Gojira filler, you know? So it's still, like, hard-hitting and lyrically impressive and just techy and interesting. So even the worst of their music in The Way of All Flesh is still, at bare minimum, an interesting listen, if not at least a good listen. It just doesn't hold up to the standard of those other songs that I mentioned that were masterpieces, and so it kind of brings down the album a little bit. And compared to the other albums ahead of it, which essentially don't have any of those filler moments, you just can't do it. You can't put it above those albums, even if this album is the one that got me into the band and made me a fan and made me check out all the other stuff. I can't put it up there just because of that, because on repeat listens, I skip pretty much all of these songs I just mentioned, except maybe All the Tears, because again, I really like the lyrics, but I never listen to Yama's Messengers. I don't like that song. I really just don't. Esoteric Surgery and Wolf Down the Earth, I mean, even Vacuity, and it has a cool riff, but outside of that, it's, again, such a nothing song. Yeah, so one half of the album is essentially masterpiece level, and the rest of it is, like, just pretty good, at best. Alright, moving on. 4.5. 4 out of 5 is what I give this record, a 4 out of 5. I wanted to give it a 4.5 out of 5, but given the fact that there is that amount of filler, it has to get a 4 out of 5. So, moving on, we have number 3, which is 2021's Fortitude. Initially, when I listened to this album, I was really impressed by how fresh it sounded. It was definitely a Gojira record, and there were definitely Gojira songs on it, and you knew it was Gojira because of those songs, but they went in directions that you didn't expect them to go into. This is by far the album that is filled with the most variety in their discography. There is like Sepultura type stuff. You've got like their From Mars to Sirius type stuff. You've got like more proggy stuff. Like, this album just goes in a lot of different directions. I mean, even some like really melodic, like poppy stuff, like the chants, where they're going like, oh, like, you know, it's doesn't, you wouldn't think Gojira would ever do that listening to The Way of All Flesh. So they're definitely going in sort of a different direction. They're evolving that Magma sound, but I feel that Fortitude did Magma right. Okay, Magma was like the first attempt, and then Fortitude was the polishing of that attempt, and it's really good. The songwriting is where Magma needed to be. I can't wait to hear what they have next, because I feel like they're only going to improve this sound on the next record. But as it stands, this record is awesome. Some of my favorite songs, Sphinx, The Grind, Into the Storm is amazing. Another World, I love that song. My favorite song on the album is probably Hold On. The beginning of that song is just so melancholic and just atmospheric. And that's a good way to describe a lot of this album. It's very atmospheric. And I really enjoyed that about it. So I would give this record a 4.5 out of 5. So at number 2 we have, drum roll, From Mars to Sirius. Yeah, I'm sure you all expected this to be number 1, but listening through Gojira's discography, there really could only be a number 1 for me, and we'll get there. From Mars to Sirius is a masterpiece. It's a concept album, and it's one of the most like abstract concepts that I've ever listened to, and it's very impressive the way that it was executed. Some of the most memorable Gojira songs reside here, Where Dragons Dwell, Flying Whales, of course, Ocean Planets, The Heaviest Matter of the Universe, some of just the best songs that Gojira ever wrote. Backbone, there's Crushing Heaviness, there's really cool odd time signatures, there's proggy stuff. It's just a fantastic album, and we actually did a Rolling Drones review of it on the channel. You can look it up, Rolling Drones review of From Mars to Sirius, where we give more specific opinions about the album. But we both agree that this is just a straight masterpiece, and I would rank this a 5 out of 5. And that leaves us with L'Enfant Sauvage. I don't know how to pronounce this fucking album, so don't shoot me, but I think it's L'Enfant Sauvage, I think. And this was released in 2012, and this is my favorite Gojira album. You're probably asking me why. Okay. So, L'Enfant Sauvage has everything that I want to hear from a Gojira record. From the really heavy shit, like Explosia and like The Axe, Liquid Fire, but it's also got like really interesting cuts, like Born in Winter. It's got like borderline melancholic, sad songs like The Gift of Guilt. Lyrically, this album is fantastic, probably the best. There's some really impactful stuff in here. And the songwriting is just top-notch, okay? Like, From Mars to Sirius had amazing songs, but L'Enfant Sauvage just elevates it to the highest bar imaginable. This isn't just the best Gojira album. This is one of the best metal albums ever made. Bare fucking minimum, okay? One of the best. Just period, even. One of the best albums ever made, not just in metal. It's masterfully mixed, masterfully performed. So many amazing, memorable riffs, bass grooves. The drumming is so technical. I love everything about it, man. This record is perfect from front to back, and I could listen to it 100 times. I would still find new things to appreciate and enjoy about the sound of the record. I would still find new songs that I now love. Maybe I was like not realizing how great they were before, but on re-listening, I realized all of the different layers to the song. Liquid Fire is a good example of that. I used to not be huge on that, but through re-listens I realized just how amazing that song is. And as a whole, this album is just amazing. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just fantastic, and you should listen to it at some point in your fucking life, even if you're not a Gojira fan. Even if you're not a Gojira fan, you should listen to this album at some point. So that is my list. I'll read through it again from front to back. Number 1, Les Fonts Sauvages. Number 2, From Mars to Sirius. Number 3, Fortitude. Number 4, The Way of All Flesh. Number 5, Magma. Number 6, Terra Incognita. And number 7, The Link. So thank you very much for watching. What is your ranking of the Gojira discography? Do you have the absolute blatant love for Gojira that I do, or do you dislike them? Tell me why in the comments. I'd love to hear some discussion from you. But without further ado, I bid you adieu. Bye-bye!